Mhm.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so today we're talking about a book. Can y'all see that? Excavating Women. Mine is backwards, but just to me. Um, and yes, Karina Prestis. Now, I first heard about this book and her last fall at ETS, the Evangelical Theological Society annual
Mhm.
meeting. She gave one of the presentations, and it was all about this book and the research that she had. So I even have notes from that session that
That's
I
so
took,
fun.
um, and then got the book after that, and finally got able to get on my list of TBD, books. So yes, I'm excited that we get to talk about it.
Yeah, well, I actually don't remember where I first heard about this book. I don't know if anyway, I'm sure somebody told me about it or something, but, it may have been actually, I looked up to give her bio to tell people who she is, Karina
Mhm.
Prestis, and she is part of the Hispanic Theological Initiative, which I have some friends in, and in fact, one person at Baylor who used to be in charge of it, and so I used to be on the list that would get, like, the books and
Yeah.
stuff that were so I'm actually wondering if that's what it is.
See?
So I'm just going to tell people who I have her bio right here.
Yeah.
And Karina Prestis is a professor of religion and biblical archaeology at the Adventist University of Sao Paulo, Brazil. Okay. And she received her PhD in archaeology from Andrews University, which is in Minnesota. Is that where it is, or Michigan? I don't know. Anyway, it's somewhere. With an emphasis in New Testament and the Byzantine periods. And her research focuses on leadership of women in early Christianity. She actually came to academia from being an architect, which is
Yes.
really fun.
Yeah.
So when she decided to pursue, and also I learned this, that the reason she started seminary is because her newly, she found out 2 weeks before her wedding that her husband wanted to go to seminary. So she became a surprise pastor's wife and found out at the seminary that her husband was attending that, this is something that pastors' wives could go for free because they wanted.
Perfect.
And
I mean,
so she actually
there's gotta
started
be a park
off
in here somewhere.
thinking it was, to,
Mhm.
like, learn to be a better pastor's wife, and then ended up joining the archaeology department, and she's been on digs in Jordan, Sicily, and Israel, and that then became what her PhD was, focused
Okay.
on archaeology. So it's actually a really fun story that I
It is.
like, how a free pastor's wife program got her PhD.
Right? Like I said,
So
it must be a perk in there somewhere. That's awesome.
yeah, so I think that's great. But, her book, and as soon as I saw it, I became interested in it. And so Kelly, can you hear my husband is back, yeah, he's doing
No,
yard work.
can't
Okay, good. I have
can't
on
really
my
hear.
thing, so I'm hoping we
Yep,
can't hear him.
you're good.
I'll knock on the door if we can hear him. But anyway, her it caught my eye immediately because I was planning a trip to Rome. And my husband and I were planning to go see some of the churches in Naples and in as well as in Rome itself, as well and Pompeii, not churches in Pompeii, but to go see the
Yeah.
women in Pompeii. And so those are all things that Karina Prestis talks about in this book.
Mhm.
And what she is doing is she is giving an overview, focused on some particular archaeological sites that are mostly between the 3rd and the 6th century, in early Christianity, just because we have more remains from that time period,
Yeah.
in which she is not asking were women ordained or, or thinking about ordination, but more asking what were women doing in these spaces and in the early church. And what she found is that women are doing a lot of the same things that men are doing. And then she compares those, what early Christian women were doing, she puts them in the context of the Greco Roman world, which I found really helpful because she listed, like, for example, she went through and listed like all of the iconography features that were used in Greco Roman art to show that women were leaders and were priests. And then she said, let's see if these same iconography actually show
Mhm.
up on Christian. Can it help us differentiate
Right.
between somebody who's just a pious praying woman and someone who actually is a priest? So
Yes.
I found that to be, very, very helpful.
Some of what I ended up reading here, took me back to my one time that I've been to Italy, and we were
Yeah.
there, with it was a class, it was a doctoral class for me, and the idea
Uh-huh.
was to find women in, the art and the inscriptions and the physical, content that's out there, in the early church. So what were women? Where do we see them in the visual art? So some of which was fun because when we get to chapter 4, which is where, she has a bunch of, images, and she really
Mosaics.
starts going
Mhm.
through a list of places and pieces of art and inscriptions that she's documenting. Like, I've been there.
Yeah.
I know what she's talking
Oh,
about.
yeah. I
So
know.
yeah, that was really great. Not that everyone can do that, and it's such a privilege to be able to actually go over there. But it really is for me just reassuring. I don't know, just really fun to say, okay, I know what she saw, and
Right.
now she's got more content to help me process it,
Yeah,
and so I'm sure
absolutely.
we'll get to some of that, yeah.
Well, what was something that stood out to you that maybe you didn't know before you read the book that you found most and then
Okay.
I'll do the same thing.
Yeah, there's several churches in this town called Ravenna, which is,
Mhm.
near Venice in Italy, and it's small. And we spent the day going from building to building to see these grand mosaics, which mosaics are made of glass, and they are as shiny today as they were in the 6th and 9th centuries when they were created. So they just are amazing, and well kept. So in this one, like, there's this big church where we see this procession of
Yeah.
20, I believe it's 22 women on one side and maybe 24 men on the other.
Mhm.
And so there's this parity, men and women. So I
Right.
remember that. That's very dramatic. But there's a
Uh-huh.
smaller chapel where you go into this very crowded, small room. It's kind of cramped almost, but he's got these arches. There's 4 arches and a dome at the top, and there's mosaics all over it. But the arches themselves have picked like the figurines of heads,
Yeah.
and 6 on each arch, so there's 24. One of them is all women. So, of course, we were all focused on these women because that's why we were there, right? To
Right.
see. Only now, because of this book, am I realizing, oh, wait, those are the 24 elders, or at least that
Yes.
is an artistic
Yeah.
presentation of that era, 6th century, I believe,
Mhm.
of what they thought of as, "Hey, let's put this into something physical. We're gonna portray the 24 elders of Revelation,"
Right.
and 6 of them are women.
Yep.
So, what that tells me is that the early church included women, by nature, like, it was normal for them to include women as part of leadership in, um, the body of
Yeah.
Christ.
And especially in these, people may not understand today, but in, these early churches, the apse, the area where we see this, which is over the altar and often has these arches, that this was the clerical space that begins to be more and more restricted in the 5th and the 6th century
Mhm.
to primarily clergy. Yet we continue to see women who are portrayed in this clerical space,
Yeah.
showing that not only and they're often portrayed with liturgical robes, which is
Yes.
really fantastic too, I think. So, and something that that Prestus helps you see those things more clearly, I think. Mhm.
Yeah, when we were there, we focused a lot on this sash called a pallium,
Mhm.
and that you see them on almost every image of a priest or an apostle. They all seem to have it, and usually there's some kind of cross on the bottom of it, so you know that that's what that stands for. But we see it on a bunch of women, kind of
Yeah.
spread throughout the mosaics and frescoes out there. So they're included. Whether it's a lot of times, like we'll see it on Mary, Mother of God, even though, like, anachronistically, she wasn't alive during those time periods, but that was their way of showing the respect that they had for her to say she was like a priest to us, like
Yeah,
she's that
absolutely.
influential and that much of a leader. So, yeah, so Prestus also brings a lot of that out as well. Oh
So
gosh, there's so much.
my favorite part, was what she's opens with. So, I mean, I'd seen a lot of these images by now too, and I really loved getting to read now that I could see them, like, when she talks about the images in the
Yeah.
catacombs. I mean, if you
Yeah.
go over there, it's just amazing how many women you see in these churches depicted doing exactly the same things that men are doing
Mhm.
with the same titles as men. In fact, one of the things that I did at the end, I took note. I know I write in my books, so nobody judge me on that. I just do it.
Hey.
But on the back here, I was listing the named women who are serving in clerical roles
Oh,
that
nice.
Christus talks about. And so you have, like, the presbyter Kelley, presbyter Leda, the archdeaconess, the deaconess named Pelumbra, Juliana priest, Nana's the female prophet, Ammonium presbyter, Cerula and Battalia, who are both with displayed with things that associate them with either deacon, but probably bishop is probably what they're portrayed with. And then we also have Veranda, who is portrayed with again seems to be a bishop, Petronilla, the female bishop Q, veiled women like in the Priscilla catacombs, and it just goes on. And
Mhm.
so, in fact, I'm thinking of doing a post that that say her name and say the
Mhm.
name of all these women
Yeah.
that we see serving in these roles. So I love that, that she brought a lot of these inscriptions that we have known of before. And also, I didn't say this. I think this is this is her dissertation that she has
Or
made,
redone.
yeah, redone and made accessible, and also, gone through more scholarly revision, etc.
Yeah.
But in it, she was focusing on what she started this research at a place where she did some of her graduate work, and it was in Sicily, and it was at a church. I think it's San
I
Miceli,
wrote it down.
and yeah, and so she's was working at a
Mhm.
church there, and she noticed that in near the altar of this early Christian church
Yes.
that there were 2 graves, and one of the graves was clearly of a male priest, and they knew that because of the mosaic that was still intact on his, and when they dug him up,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
he had all of the trappings that would be associated with priest. Also, he's buried at the altar, okay? And
And that
there's
was a big sign. Yeah.
that he was a priest, and there's only
Yeah.
one other person buried at the altar, and that grave, they didn't know who was in it because the mosaic on top of it had been destroyed. But when they got into it, it's the body of a woman
Mhm.
who is also wearing all of the trappings of a priest, the things associated with a priest. And I found it interesting. And those who want to know more, I was just listening to Sandra Glahn interviews Karina Prestis on her Chick Report, and so I
Mhm.
was listening to Karina talk about this,
Yeah.
and I found that really helpful. She said that. They knew that the mosaic on top of the woman's grave had not been destroyed by robbers because all of her grave goods were intact. And so it seems to have been a deliberate destruction of who she was,
Mhm.
whereas the male priest was left intact, which is interesting. I mean,
And that's not the only time that that has happened.
absolutely,
One of the
absolutely.
I think my favorite church, which is also in chapter 4 here, is, the Basilica of Saint, Praxedes, which is
Yeah.
in Rome. It's small, it's next to one of the big major
Mhm.
basilicas, so it's tucked away in a little, like an alley to get into it, but once you get in the door and it's just this huge, amazing building full of mosaics,
Yeah.
and there's this tiny little chapel off to the side, for Saint Zeno, I think is the name of it,
Yeah.
and, there are 4, mosaics of 4 women, and 2 of them are Praxedes and her sister Pudentiana, they were sisters in the 2nd century, and one of them, that's her church. The other one is Mary, and the other one is the Pope at the time
Yeah,
in the ninth
Paschal.
century. It's his mother, Theodora, except that, and he gave her the title Episcopa. So except that they tried to take out Theodora, the RA, so it's
Right.
Theodo. So later those, little is it
Yeah.
tesserae are trying to be removed to take away her female name.
Right.
except that there are other records in the church that actually say her full name that they didn't get to. So we have that. You've got in the, oh, what is it? The baptistry at St.
Yeah.
John Lateran.
No. San
Uh,
Giovanni. Yeah.
that one, yes. So there's this, mosaic of Mary, and she's got the pallium, but instead of a cross, we now just have a red line.
Yep.
They took the little red parts of the horizontal. So, like, there's this obvious attempt to desecrate
Mhm.
physical evidence of women in these sorts of positions, through the centuries. Like, these are all different this all happened different
Yeah.
times throughout the last, what, 1,500 years.
Yeah,
So,
and
yeah, the cover up is pretty sloppy on some of these.
well, and the latter in San Giovanni, the baptistry, in the early 20th century, they erected an altar that
Yeah.
actually covers up the image now
Was
of
it that
Mary.
late? Because it's
It's
huge, it's
it's
baroque,
like
it's a mess.
1902, 1903 is when
Yeah,
they erected it, and the
just
only
can't
thing
hide
that
it.
covers up in the mosaic is this image of Mary wearing these clerical
Mhm.
robes,
Yeah.
and the pallium, which for those of you who don't know, the pallium was a liturgical cloth that was used for those celebrating Eucharist, and so you would hold the Eucharist bread in your hand with that cloth.
Mhm.
And so that's what Mary's wearing, and it was hidden. If you
Yeah.
walk into the church today, you're gonna be like, "Am I in the right church?"
Yeah, you have
So,
to know what you're looking for, to go right and look
absolutely,
for it. Yeah.
absolutely. So, I think from that, so what it's not a long book, it's a short book, it's only 5 chapters. The 2 and she sort of sets the stage for it. Oh, in fact, can I say one more thing I really liked about
Yeah,
this book?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So in the she sets the stage for it. She spends the first couple of chapters kind of talking about of why she's doing this and the problem of, thinking about women in the early church. And one of the things that she says, "Look, um, oftentimes, we've written our theology backwards. So we've written our theology based upon what we know later, council decrees and so forth have said. So, like, if you think about the early church, we're looking at like 4th and 5th century and 6th century councils,
Mhm,
where we start seeing decrees that are saying women shouldn't do this. And we especially
mhm,
start seeing that in the 5th century. And she says, so we often take those and we read those backwards and say, this is what's going on in the 1st century and the 2nd century and the 3rd century. And you can't do that, because those decrees were written after all of
mhm.
this. Um, and they're not reflecting what is going on in those early centuries. And so I think that was a really important point. And she said, we've got to look at we have to look at 1st century evidence through the 1st century context.
Yeah.
And the same thing, we have to look through it through the context of the time. And so she does a good sort of overview of what Greco Roman women's lives were like.
Mhm,
And she establishes, this is something that I certainly saw when we were in Pompeii, where you see all of these Greek priestesses, Greco Roman priestesses who are displayed in public, like Eumakia is one that, I followed her all around in Pompeii looking for everything about her. And she's really publicly displayed and, so, that she is the person who paid for this stuff and that she is also so she was a patron as well as a priestess. And
mhm.
it's really public and nobody's like trying to hide it. And then Prestus goes and says, "Look, is this just going on with wealthy women or what about more ordinary women?" And so she talks through some of the scholarship that shows that ordinary women too were also out in public. They're
Oh,
out
yeah.
talking in public, they're out, in
Mhm.
politics, they're working out in public. And I think this really caught my attention because we see so much of these arguments that, it's only since the advent of feminism that women have left the home and gone into the workplace. And this is just not true. I mean, I could have told you before I read Prestis's book that this is not
Sure.
true. But Prestis, she makes it really, clear. She's like, look, all of these women are not confined to the household. This is not, that we don't have the public private divide that
Right.
starts to become common later on. And so
Yeah.
I just thought she did a great job, like
Mhm.
kind of just pointing that out and walking through some of the evidence from more ordinary women, so non elite women. Yeah.
And that brings us to, the difference between what she's doing and the other kinds of records that we're used to looking at. I think most of the history that we get comes from the written record. which
Yes.
is by nature written, by a wealthy person, or at least the kind that gets saved through the years.
Yeah.
They are, probably clerics, because they were educated, or they were in the royal family, that level of society, right?
Right.
And they're predominantly going to be men because that was the society that they were in, and they're also going to be, selective. So only some we have just a fraction that has been saved through the centuries of what has been written, right? But this evidence that Prestus and other archaeologists are bringing up are the kind you can't just go erase. I mean, like, they
Right.
tried to take out some words and some letters, but it's super obvious what they were doing. But, inscriptions and mosaics and frescoes, they're hard to destroy, right? I mean, obviously
Right.
they can be destroyed, like the grave,
Right.
but they don't change. You can't erase them and write something else on top, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So this is the kind of everyday evidence. And what I don't know the number, and I can't remember the source, but archaeologists, there's just this huge record of inscriptions that
Mhm.
have been discovered over the last 20 years, even that they haven't even gone through them
Oh,
all
yeah.
yet, processed them. And they're like, look, they're not exciting. It's not like they're telling us the royal family's secrets. This is
Right.
like a tax receipt or,
You're
a
talking to a
grocery
social
list.
historian here, Kelly. It's like, this is
Yes.
like my bread and butter. I
Yes.
love this. Yeah.
Yeah, so but it's telling you the everyday stories, right? It's just giving you
Yeah.
a glimpse into society, but they're also the kind that, they were etching them into things that stay forever, these
Absolutely.
days,
Yeah.
so
And I mean, and it shows women not just
yep,
working, but women as owners, women
mhm,
as, these as priests, I mean, as priestesses, or I mean, they're priests. We kind of
yeah,
add the feminine ending onto it. But anyway, but they're doing all of these things, and there's nothing unusual about this. And it's not at all surprising that we get Christian women who are also coming from this Greco-Roman background where you have a lot of visibility of women in these spaces, and you have a lot of, women giving money for religious causes and
mhm,
helping to fund this stuff. And this is exactly what they're doing in the early church. I mean,
yeah,
this is something that I think Sandra Glahn does really well in her book, Nobody's Mother, about Artemis, sort of thinking like what these women were doing in the church in Ephesus is what women of the, Greco-Roman women did. They
mhm,
took, and there's nothing surprising about it when you look at it from the context of that time.
right,
So I think Pristus does a great job, and I think she also helps turn our focus away. This is something that I've been talking about lately with the Southern Baptist Convention. And in
mhm,
fact, when you were just talking about the inscriptions that were preserved by
yeah,
men, I made me think of Al Mohler and his little speech at the
oh,
Southern Baptist Convention this week, where he cites particular documents from Baptist history to say that Baptists have always believed that women shouldn't be preachers and pastors. And you talk about cherry picking. And you
right,
and you also talk about men who have something to, lose if and they're the ones who are preserving these documents and defining these documents. And so if you look back at church history as a whole and you say, well, women have never done these things because all of the official council documents say that they can't do it. It's
mhm,
like, yeah, no, that's actually not, that is evidence that people were trying to keep women from doing these things. This is
right,
not evidence that women weren't doing these things, nor is it evidence that God says women can't do these things.
yeah,
And I think
the
that's important.
we both kinda honed in on a quote from I believe he was a 9th century,
Yeah,
bishop talking
yeah, yeah,
about a 4th century council.
yeah.
So, 9th century guy looking back at a 4th century event, and he talks about it, and Beth, you're looking it up, right? Okay.
Oh, yeah, I have it
I'll
right here. Do you want me to read it?
I'll set the stage. So he's what I want is what I guess want everyone to think through is he's gonna say something about what women can't do or what the council people were upset that women were doing. But the point isn't that they were upset with it. The point was that they would do it. Oh,
Yes.
I can hear your husband's stuff out there
Can
now.
you hear it now? I'm
I
so
can.
sorry.
It's okay. It's funny.
Oh, he's actually far out there, but I guess it's just so
It's
loud.
just
Sorry, y'all.
zzz.
Scott's doing yard work. He's not so anyway, but he's doing it.
It's
So
okay.
there you are. He
But,
yeah.
like, from the first I mean, we don't have the numbers, but 1st to the 3rd century to the 4th century, like, there's evidence that, both men and women are doing the work of the church in different capacities, just we don't even know all of them.
I'll pull my
And then
curtain.
some people, as things got, more, institutionalized, Constantine comes along, those sorts of things, also, um I think that the patriarchal society that they lived in started to creep back into the church, and so you've got,
Yeah,
lots of church fathers who say things about women that are terrible, but at the same time, even up to the 4th century, women are still, serving in some of these leading capacities.
oh,
Okay, so
absolutely.
this
Yeah,
bishop in the ninth
yeah,
century
yes.
reflects back on the 4th century. Read that
He
quote.
reflects. So it's kind of long, but I'm going to read it because I think this is absolutely great. I just love this. Okay, and I'm having to hold it out because I forgot to put my glasses on and they're in the other room.
And you want me
So
to read it?
no, it's okay. It's fine. I'll just hold it out. And it says, because your prudence has moved you to inquire how we should understand female priest or female deacon in the canons, it seems to me that in the primitive church, according to the word of the Lord, the harvest was great and the laborers were few. Religious women used to be ordained as caretakers in the Holy Church. As Blessed Paul shows, and I love this part, in the letter to the Romans, when he says, I commend you, my sister Phoebe, who is in the ministry of the church at Cenchrea. Hence, it is understood that not only men, but also women presided over the churches because of their great influence. For women, long accustomed to the rites of the pagans and instructed also in philosophical teachings, were for these reasons converted more easily and taught more liberally in the worship of religion. Okay, we just say what you just heard there so far. This is somebody who is kind of writing to him and complaining, as Kelley would. And he says, look, we've got to understand that in the early church, the rules were different. It's kind of what he says. And he says women did these things. Okay. Women served. And in fact, we know this because Paul tells us women did these things. So if you think about these modern arguments today that say nobody used Romans 16 to talk about women in leadership before the feminists, they're all caught up on the feminist movement. Um, that's just not true. The early church and the medieval church used Romans 16 the same way. They said, hey, look, women were serving in the early church. Okay. So then he goes on and he says, the 11th canon of the Council of Laodicea prohibits when it says it is not fitting for those women who are called female presbyters or presiders to be ordained in the churches. We believe female deacons truly to have been ministers of such things. For we say that a minister is a deacon from which we perceive female deacon to have been derived. Finally, we read in the 15th century canon of the Council of Chalcedon that a female deacon is not to be ordained before her 40th year, and this was the highest gravity. We believe women were enjoined to the office of baptizing so that the bodies of other women might be handled by them without any deeply felt sense of shame. For just as those who were called female presbyters assumed the office of preaching, leading, and teaching, so female deacons had taken up the office of ministry of baptizing, a custom that is no longer expedient.
Yeah.
I mean, did y'all catch all that? Uh, you know, women were preaching, teaching, leading, serving as presbyters, serving as deacons in the early church. And this bishop knew it. And he says, yeah, women were doing all those things.
And
This,
yes, Charles, that is Atto of is it Vercelli? Vercelli?
yes,
Yeah,
it is. Yep.
uh, that's who you think it is.
Otto the second. Yeah.
Yeah, so she quotes him at length. There are some other I've found this same quote in a few other blogs, and articles
Yeah,
while I was doing a little
absolutely.
research,
Yeah,
so yeah.
I mean, I haven't looked through some of the usual suspects who talk against women's, ordination and what they're doing, and how do they respond to this? Do you know?
They don't respond to this quote because they don't look at anything before the Protestant Reformation. Okay, that's my theory. That's
Interesting.
just my my own opinion is that
Yeah, yeah.
anything I've read over the last few years as I was researching Mary and doing, this big historical review of content about her. Of course, I read a
Yeah.
lot of theologians through the centuries, that today's conservative Christian Protestant leaders aren't reading much past Luther and Calvin.
Okay.
Okay, it's Catholic to them.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know.
And
I know all about that,
okay,
yep.
so I mean, there may be stuff out there I just don't know about, which, I mean, that's
I don't kn
probably,
Yeah,
there's plenty out there I haven't read, but I just, in the conversations, the articles that are being written, the chatter, I don't see those that crew
right.
talking about anything beyond, I mean, they'll say Bible, and then they'll go, and then Calvin, that
Absolutely.
kind of thing.
And, I think what's important about this too is that it doesn't you don't have to agree with with the medieval theology of these clergy, because that's not what this quote is about. What this quote is about is them simply reflecting on the reality
Right.
that women served in leadership positions in the early church, and they know it.
Yeah.
They know it. And this is and throughout the medieval church, and I've talked about this a lot, and I'll be talking about it more in my current book that I just am having so much fun writing. But you have, the medieval church could not get away. They couldn't make people believe that women did not serve in these roles because the evidence was around them. They were going on pilgrimage to these churches. They had these stories about female saints that they heard all the time. And what the only thing that they could do was they would essentially say, it's different now. And in fact, there's one
Yeah.
sermon where it says, women these days don't do this, after,
Well,
yeah,
apparently they
which
were saying that here in this book as
absolutely,
well, like, they
that's,
used to
yeah.
get that, yeah. I
So,
find our conversation timely, because, y'all, we didn't plan this timing.
mm,
We did our first chat about Preston Sprinkle's book back at the very beginning of March, like, the day before it came out. We both had copies. And so we talked about that book, which is all about his journey from complementarian theology and how he eventually became an egalitarian. So he goes through all the theological, biblical passages. So we had a great time chatting about
yep,
that. That spawned Preston responding to us in a variety of ways. He and Beth did their own couple of podcasts together. And even just recently, like last week, he did another follow-up,
oh,
podcast where
I
he
missed that.
responded to both of us, which I was
Oh,
like,
did
"Yeah,
he? Oh, I
there
haven't.
it is." I
What did
know,
he
yeah.
say? I actually haven't listened to
Oh,
that.
no, he was just kinda going through some of our blogs and our conversations
Oh,
about
oh,
points that in his words, egalitarians made that were, like, a little bit of pushback, and so he's always very gracious about
oh,
saying, "Oh, they had a good point," or, "But here's why I would say this," that kind of thing. So that's
okay. I haven't
we
seen
had
that.
we had several responses. So all that to say, after that, we got together and said, "We should do this again." And so I think it was about 6 or 8 weeks ago,
Yeah,
decided on the book. We put the date in our calendar, and then maybe 2 or 3 weeks later, Al Mohler comes out and says, "I'm gonna make an amendment to the constitution of the SBC when the annual meeting comes in mid-June."
right.
And then, of course, the conversation since then has been all about that.
Yep.
And so we did not plan this talk because of him, but, here we are.
Here
So,
we are, and I think it's highly relevant, but I don't know. I mean, it's highly relevant because this is the thing that, the Southern Baptist Convention as led, I do wanna make a point here that when you say the Southern Baptist Convention, I am talking about the people who are meeting together for the 2 days a year that they all come together and they legally exist as an entity, and all it is the representatives that are sent from churches. So, it's mostly the people who can afford to go or somebody's, supporting their way to go, or it's close to them and they can drive to it, and so there's more than 12 million Southern Baptists, and this is only 8,000 of them who
yeah.
got together and voted on this. And so I think that's important to point out. I think this also is an important point to make about why voting matters and why individual voices matter.
Mhm.
Because I think there's probably more Southern Baptists out there who disagree with Al Mohler than who agree with him, but they're not showing up at the convention and voting. So, okay, I totally distracted myself. I was saying all that, but what they have been arguing they've been trying to argue is that what they are doing is countercultural, because they're going against the feminist movement, because what is cultural is for women to try to be in charge of things. Okay, I mean, I have no idea where they got that from, and I mean, it's because they reject the idea of the historical reality of patriarchy, I guess. I don't understand. But anyway, so that's one thing that they're arguing, and then the other thing that they try to argue is that what they are doing is biblical as well as historical. And
Mhm.
so they're like, "This is what Christians do. This is how biblically based, orthodox with a little o Christians do, is that there's only men in charge." And Al Mohler has tried to do this by saying for 2,000 years that First
Yeah.
Timothy 2 has been interpreted the same way. And then now he tried to say that for all of Baptist history, this is what
Well,
they have done.
he
And
forgot that there were Baptist historians like Beth, Allison, Barr out there ready to counter that with a
uh,
Dallas Morning News article. So y'all go check that out. That just came out a couple days ago. Uh,
and church historians like here, yeah,
yeah, history is, I think, such a revealing, reality. Just dig in and see what has actually happened in the past.
absolutely.
Yeah, I really I've been mulling over, like, what am I gonna write next? I mean, my main concern with the Mueller amendment was the redefinition of pastoring,
Yeah.
in which
Mm,
they really limit the application of this. They really just don't want women in the pulpit. That's
right.
really the main thing.
Yeah.
And so they phrase it in such a way that they can't hold the office nor function of pastor, and then they had to rephrase what they meant by that, and they basically said specifically preaching.
Yep.
So they're kinda giving away what their real motivation here is,
Yeah, they're just
but
trying to keep
you
women
can't
out.
you can't have women, teaching the church body with any kind of authority about spiritual matters. So they're gonna open up a whole big can of worms, if this passes next year to make it official, and we'll see where this goes. But I've been mulling, like, what is my next response, or do I even wanna write any more about this? I don't know.
I'm with you on that.
But I feel like there's the historian, which I'm not
Yeah.
as strong as you are in it, so I might just leave the history to you and others and go back to the biblical studies because I am a biblical scholar
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
say, the I appreciate the argument of, "But women were doing this," and then they list out a bunch of women in all the different ways that God used them to lead, but really that's not their argument. Their argument is that there's First Timothy 2 and there's,
First
First
Corinthians
Corinthians 11 and
14.
14,
Yep.
and, like, there's these 3 or 4 little passages. They're worried about the theology in the Bible, so I'm like, I may just pivot back to that and kind of, I don't
Well,
know.
I think that, I think thinking about what actually is a pastor, I think we have gotten really far from what a pastor actually is.
Mhm.
And thinking about that, and it wasn't really an office in the early church. It was the people who are pastoring, and this is the work that they're doing, the shepherding. And okay, I'm going to have to tell my husband after this, but anyway, can you
Okay.
still
Can't
hear him?
can't hear that anything there.
Oh, okay. Anyway, it's okay. He's trying to do the yard work before the storm hits.
Well, I mean, give kudos. Let him have it. It's fine.
I know. But, anyway, so I think that would be, I think it's a really important point to think about how the Southern Baptist world is redefining what it means to be a Baptist and how that's I mean, how what it means to be
Oh,
a
that's a
pastor
whole other
and
argument,
how it's
right?
well, they're doing that too. That was
Yeah.
a, Freudian slip on my part. I would argue they're actually not historically Baptist anymore,
They're
because they're
moving to
yeah, I
creedal. Yeah,
yep,
that kind of
absolutely.
thing.
But
Mhm.
they're also redefining what it means to be a pastor, and that's gonna have really big effects, moving out. So I think that would be a great place to go. Um, but before we leave Prestus, what
Yeah.
are there any things that you wish she had done more or you wish she had done differently?
Um, I think I was waiting for more inscriptions, and maybe that was just high excitement and expectation and waiting to see what, information that I had not already heard, not realizing that even my one trip to Italy exposed me to probably about half of what she has in here, but, I mean, obviously, not everybody's gonna have that
Right.
experience.
Yeah.
So, for, uh, most readers, I think you're gonna all get a little, mind blow, when you start seeing, especially chapter 4, where she really starts listing out some of the,
The
evidence that
mosaics.
she's uncovered that point to, women's participation and leadership.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was like, I want to see inscriptions. And I was like, oh, I've already seen that one. I've seen that one. Well, they still care,
There's
right? Yeah.
so, she said it was in because Carolyn Osek and Kevin Madigan have also done that book on, I can't remember what they titled it, but it's like they walked through like all the existing
Ordination,
inscriptions.
the
Yeah,
book of
something
ordination.
about ordained women in the early church. Yeah. And essentially they're just going through and listing all of the
Yes.
inscriptions that I think. And so so there has been a lot of work doing that. And as you said, there's still a whole lot more that just because there's so many of them out there, it's gonna be really interesting.
She could have part 2 easily, and
Yeah,
she
to
might be
see what
like, "Hold
happens.
off, y'all, give me a few years," but, like, the content out there is waiting to be collated and, analyzed. It's
Yeah.
there.
Um, I was thinking about the accessibility of it, which I'm not always a great judge, but I think maybe a way that I would put this is that if you're interested in the topic and you want to see clear evidence that women were actually serving in pastoral roles, in what we would consider to be pastoral roles today, and were clearly in leadership positions, this is a really good introduction to it. With the caveat that I would not give this to a freshman class. I would probably give it to an upper level class.
Mhm.
So just letting you know, it's not hard reading level. It's just that she is walking through the evidence. It's an academic book,
Yeah,
but it is also an academic book that's made for a the goal of it
right,
is for the public.
yeah.
But it still is from an academic perspective. So I think I
That's
think,
totally fair.
yeah.
Yeah,
hmm
yeah.
So
Okay.
anyway,
Well,
okay.
we hope that you guys will pick it up or at least read the articles that others have written about it and the content that she is exposed to the world. Or go to Italy, go to Sicily, go to Greece, and go see some of the stuff for
It's a
yourself.
really good excuse to
I
go,
know, right?
and it's
Right?
just, amazing when you walk into these spaces and you just see the women literally written on the walls,
I
and
know.
you're like, "Why didn't anyone ever tell me this?"
Okay, and I'll just harp
Oh,
on that for just a second. I grew up Catholic, but I've been a Protestant my entire adult life, and so I didn't even realize what I had back then when it came to the history
yes.
of, in Italy, when we were there, we realized that in every town we went to, there was at least one, if not multiple churches named after Mary, okay?
Mhm.
They had all the names, but they love her there, but also there were churches named after women saints that I had never heard of.
Yep,
Uh, Even though I was raised in that world, I still had no idea, along with all my Protestant girlfriends here. Like, we were like, "Who's that person? Who's" so,
yep.
but back in the old country, so to speak, those women were honored with churches named after them, and their stories lived on for centuries. So
Visibility.
we have to rediscover them. Yeah.
Yeah, the visibility of women in
Yeah.
before the Reformation in our church spaces
Yeah.
was very different from what we have today, and I knew that, but it is being impressed upon me more and more and more,
Mm.
and so, anyway, yeah, and I think that's really important when we think about why do people believe Al Mohler? It's because we walk into our churches and we see all men,
Mm.
that's yeah, and we hear all men preached from the
Mhm.
pulpit, and we, don't see women serving in leadership roles, and we just are like, "Okay, this is just the way
Mhm.
church is." Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I was in, Ireland for a graduation gift to myself and my husband. We went a few months ago, and we were there on, well, 2 Sundays. So, on both of them, we were in this enormous, Anglican, church, different places, and one of them was Christ Cathedral,
mhm,
Christ Church in Dublin,
right,
and that particular they have a female, rector, is that the name?
yeah,
Yeah, so she presided over and I received communion from her for the first time from a
yes.
female ever, and
Oh,
I was so moved. Like, I just don't
yeah,
I don't, live in those spaces. So, yeah,
absolutely,
it's
it's just
it's
beautiful, and you
embodied.
don't realize it.
Mhm.
So, anyway.
Hey, do you happen to have, your copy of our next conversation
Well,
piece?
I don't because I
Oh,
only
no,
have
okay.
it digitally, so I can't show it, but
Mine's in the other
y'all,
room.
we're really excited because we're going to come back and we're going to talk in early September, and
Mhm.
we're going to talk about Kristen Kobes Dumay's Live, Laugh, Love. And so you need to stay tuned to us for that.
We'll let you know.
Okay?
Yes. So I'm
So
still in the middle of it. I haven't finished it yet, so
oh,
I'm
yeah,
working
it's
slowly.
great. It's I was so excited. I read it, and then afterwards, the publisher asked me if I would endorse it, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, yes,
Oh
I'm so
gosh, yes.
excited to endorse
Yeah.
Kristen's,"
So if
and
you've
it's
ever read Jesus and John Wayne, like, and this was back in 2020 that came out, 21, something like that,
yeah,
and that was her history of, basically the last 75 years of evangelical men and the movements that they led. This is basically the female version of that,
yep.
kind of tracking the women of evangelicalism, and it is more than just interesting, it is
The
mind-blowing,
the title is Live, Laugh, Love: The Secret History of White Christian Women and the World They Made.
yeah, that
And
subtitle.
it's really incredible, and for those of you who are near, in Texas, near Waco, I'm actually having her come to Baylor, and so we're gonna have an event at Fabled, and where she's gonna do a talk at Baylor, and we're going to launch her book with her. So, stay tuned, we'll be announcing it soon.
Yeah, maybe I'll
So,
make it up there, maybe I'll see you there.
be good. Yeah,
So,
okay.
alright, thanks
Thanks,
for joining
y'all.
us, everybody, and thanks, Beth, this is always fun.
Yep, see you later.
Alrighty, bye.
Bye-bye.